So we're about to start reading The Grapes of Wrath, a book by John Steinbeck. Before we read the book, I really think it's important that we gain understanding of the time in which the book was written, the culture, the people that it was written about, and try and find out really why the author wanted to write this book. In this case, it was written by John Steinbeck during the Dust Bowl. And so what we're going to do right now is just take a look at the time, and then we're also going to take a look at what John Steinbeck actually was doing during the time of the Dust Bowl and why we might think he wanted to write a book that would make the statement that this book does. So first off, what I want you guys to do is take a look at this picture and just kind of look at the woman's face and ask yourself, what do you think she's thinking? What do you think she's feeling? And what does this picture say? To me, it looks like this woman is really tired. It looks like she's been through a lot. If you notice, her children's faces are turned away from the camera. That kind of speaks a feeling of shame, maybe. It was taken by a woman named Dorothea Lange during 1936. And this picture is actually called The Migrant Mother. And it has become just really characteristic of the time. People look at this picture and they say, oh, that's from the Dust Bowl. You can see they look kind of dirty. The woman's actually you can notice she's got a baby in her arms, and it just looks like she has had a hard life, a really hard life. So before the actual Dust Bowl happened, the United States president was President Hoover. And in 1929, the stock market crashed, and that is just a huge thing. It was pivotal in bringing on the Depression, which of course is a huge thing in our nation's history. And the banking system during that time basically became chaos, and people didn't know if they were going to be able to get their money out of the banks. They didn't know if it was just completely gone. And so what people ended up doing was they would rush the banks. They would take their money out, which in turn actually brought more chaos and brought the banks down. Many banks went out of business during this time. And so people ended up just acting and feeling very poor. It was a very unsettling time. People didn't know what to think about the future. They didn't know what to think about what was going on at that time. It was really scary. And this is a quote from actually The Grapes of Wrath. John Steinbeck wrote, "The bank is something more than men, I tell you. It's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it." So obviously during this time that John was writing this book, he was thinking about the things that were going on in the country at this time. Food was really scarce, and in turn there was also this growing gap between people that had a lot and people that had absolutely nothing. There wasn't really a middle class during this time. The actual area that we're talking about is Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. And you probably have heard the term Okie, which is basically talking about the people like the Jodes, which we're going to learn about in the Grapes of Wrath, that are coming from Oklahoma to California, are coming out west because of the Dust Bowl. Now, the Dust Bowl, you probably don't know exactly what to think of what that is. But basically what happened is the agricultural conditions, of course these areas are really agricultural areas. There's just all farming in these areas. And what happened is there was a drought. And usually when there's a drought, it's hard, but the land can take it basically. And during this time what happened was the topsoil got so dehydrated and so dry that it basically, whenever there would be a strong wind, which there is in a lot of these places because they're the prairie, the winds would just kick up the dust and just put it everywhere. It'd be on people's houses, all over people's clothes. Just, you can imagine just a thick layer of the finest dust on everything, every inch of everything that you own and your body. That's basically what happened during this time. It was so bad that the government created a report, the Great Plains Drought, and what they found was the reason for the Dust Bowl was not the actual drought and lack of rain, but what it was the land had been worked so hard and not been given a time to rest that the topsoil just became so drained of any nutrients nutrient that would actually hold it to the ground, that is what made it able to turn into this dust that just went everywhere. This is another quote from The Grapes of Wrath. It says, "The houses were shut tight and cloth wedged around doors and windows, but the dust came in so thinly that it could not be seen in the air, and it settled like pollen on the chairs and the tables and the dishes." So again, it's just everywhere. This dirt everywhere on everything. Think about your bed, your pillow, everything that you have is just covered in dust. So the result basically is that for 8 years, dust flew on the southern plains. It became a yellowish-brown haze from the south, and in rolling walls it came from the north. The simplest acts of life, breathing, eating a meal, taking a walk, were no longer simple. Children wore dust masks to and from school, which actually they ended up closing a lot of schools because of this. Women hung wet sheets over windows, and the crops basically flew away. So this is people's living. It's what they do. It's their way of life. It's their culture at that time to be farmers, and it's just literally gone up in dust and blown away. So thousands of farmers found themselves cropless and homeless as the banks foreclosed on their homes. So they didn't have any crops, so they couldn't sell their crops and get any money, couldn't pay for their land, couldn't pay for their homes, and the banks foreclosed on them. So what they would do, the families would take everything they had, all their belongings, and load them onto jalopies or a really old truck, basically the oldest kind of truck you can get, load everything they can, and one person would drive the truck, maybe with the mom next to them or the small children, and then everyone else would walk alongside of them. And they were going west because at this time, California was sending propaganda all over this area to get people to come out west to work for them, because they knew they could get people to work for small wages if they promised actual work for these people, because they didn't have anything at that point. And this is one more quote from The Grapes of Wrath. "And then the dispossessed were drawn west from Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, from Nevada and Arkansas. Families, tribes, dusted out, tractored out." A lot of the families had bought tractors and then they couldn't pay for them, so their tractors also got repossessed. "Carloads, caravans, homeless and hungry, 20,000 and 50,000 and 100,000 and 200,000. They streamed over mountains, hungry and restless, restless as ants, carrying, scurrying to find work to do, to lift, to push, to pull, to pick, to cut, anything, any burden to bear for food. The kids were hungry. They got no place to live, like ants scurrying for work and for food, and most of all, for land." So again, this idea of your land being your kind of your life spring, your well-being, and your pride also, and that was just taken away from people, and they're still in search of that as they went west to California. Here's another picture. You can see some kids in this picture. They're living, that's their house. It looks like a little shack, something you probably wouldn't even want to put your belongings in to store for the winter, but this is where they lived. Once migrants arrived in California, they found a very different story than what they were told. When they came to California, there wasn't as much work. There were so many people coming that there wasn't enough work for them. The actual farmers that had these homes for them to live in didn't really pay them well. They didn't have bathrooms. It just was very poor conditions for these people. Those that made it into California found the number of new workers disproportionate to the amount of work there was. Migrant families remained transient because as the crops would change around California, they would move wherever the crop was coming in. So rather than coming out here and finding a place, finding their land, and like really digging their roots in, they had to keep moving. So what the country did is they came up with these camps, basically. So they went from farm-owned, man-made camps to these FSA camps where they had